Let's talk about Africa's most advanced economy, which is South Africa. Is currently walking a tightrope from the ESKOM power utility crisis to high unemployment, inflation, as well as corruption in government. These are no easy times for the South African economy. On Thursday, the Reserve Bank raised its repo rate by 25 basis points and delivered a dire outlook on the country's GDP for the next 2 years. Discussing all of this with me from an investment point of view is Chris Hart. He's the executive chairman of Impact Africa Investment. Chris, this is the first time of getting together in the new year. Thank you so much. It's good to hear from you. It's good to have you on the show tonight, my friend.
No, thank you very much indeed. Yes,
thank you. I'm sure you listened yesterday to Lastest the Reserve Bank chairman. You've read it in the papers today, I'm sure. So what do you make of the decision to raise interest rate by 25 basis points?
Well, I think you can see that the Monetary Policy Committee remains torn. In the last rate hike that they had last year, it was a 75 basis point hike. It was not a unanimous decision with the Monetary Policy Committee. Same yesterday, 25 basis hike. It was not unanimous. And basically, I think the 25 basis hike was certainly less than expected, especially following the 75 basis hike that we had last year. But the fact that they're torn is that the Reserve Bank is in a conundrum. Inflation has risen, and it's really they're sort of behind the curve as far as trying to keep inflation under control, because from a growth point of view, the economy is in the doldrums. And I think since their last meeting to this meeting, the whole problem of load shedding with electricity has become worse, right? And in factoring that in, they've had to downgrade the economic growth forecast for South Africa by quite a significant amount to 0.7%. And that is not very high. It's below our population growth rate. And this has been really the problem in the last 10 years or so of the South African economy, is that we haven't been growing above our population growth rate. We've been growing well below our peers in South and Southern Africa. We've been growing below the peers in emerging markets. Even last year, the growth of 2.5% was basically a post-COVID rebound. We're seeing no follow-through from that COVID rebound. The economy continues to remain moribund. And that is, I think you intimated it right at the beginning. Load shedding is one of them, but there's corruption in government, which is rampant. And there's no sign of anything. We look like we're going to be entering the grey list of, and that's going to affect the again, international interactions with South Africa. In other words, because of that, it becomes for some too much trouble actually to deal with South Africa. So it is like experiencing a form of sanctions at a time we really don't need it. Very, very high unemployment. In fact, it's shockingly high unemployment. And that's exacerbated by the fact that we are not growing as an economy.
So you have,
anyway,
Chris, you have an interest rate now effectively around 10.75%. Is that in line with the expectations of the business and investment community?
At the moment, it's in line with the expectation, but of course, it's very difficult when the economy is slowing down to actually see rate hikes into the face of that slowdown. Because of the inflation effects. Monetary policy really torn at the moment between low growth on the one hand and high unemployment and high inflation on the other. And you have to anchor inflation, because ultimately high inflation does actually negatively impact the long-term growth prospects. But it doesn't help if you don't have compensating policies to free up the economy, to actually deal with things like load shedding and bureaucracy, red tape and corruption, so that you can get some compensation and some counterbalance to that. So what we've got is really a very, very strong throttling of the economy by the dead hand, you could say, of government, an increasingly incapable government against an increasingly frustrated economy, where we're not actually, where there's a huge mismatch and a huge malalignment if you like.
Okay, so the GDP has been revised lower for the next 2 years by the central bank governor. Energy crisis is forecast to last about 2 more years. What's your outlook on the expected impact of all of this on corporate earnings, Chris?
Yeah, well, I think firstly the most optimistic is a 2-year extension of the energy crisis. It's probably at an absolute minimum 5 years, and that's just from a supply point of view. In other words, the crisis is twofold. One is supply, the other is price. Electricity is an enormous price shock as well to the government. When they announced the latest increases, which was 19% for this year and further next year, a total of 33% in this year and next year, you're sitting against what they call stage 6 load shedding, the heaviest load shedding that we'd ever had. So it's both a supply and a price crisis. A lot of our industries were set up on the basis that we had abundant, cheap electricity. That was the competitive advantage. So you can imagine from a lot of point of view, especially in the beneficiation side, that those industries are being driven into being marginal, or even to the point that it's actually going to be closing down. And I know we often lament, not only in South Africa, but in Africa, that we export raw materials to the rest of the world. They refine it and we import finished goods at the end. But South Africa is in fact quite a strong beneficiator, even of raw materials that we import and even and re-export. But these industries are under threat. Our oil refining industry, for instance, is very underinvested and obsolete at the moment, and we're not getting new investment into that place to regenerate that industry, which was it is strong, but there's no confidence to do that reinvestment. In energy, our aluminium smelting industry, for instance, depends on cheap electricity and abundant electricity, and that's not there. And that, of course, threatens entire communities going forward. But there are huge opportunities that come from this as well.
I know there are opportunities to make even where there are crises on hand. Thank you so much for your time. Have a nice weekend. Chris Hart, Executive Chairman at Impact Africa Investment. Thank you so much. We'll check in with you in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you.